Tony was a great athlete. I mean, he would have been, I'm the oldest of my family, so I never had a big brother, but he was an AAU swimming and diving
And he
champion.
was a great actor.
You think you know Leave It to Beaver as the wholesome portrait of 1950s American family life. But the real story behind the Cleaver household is filled with depression, exploitation, and shattered dreams. Jerry Mathers, Tony Dow, and Barbara Billingsley weren't living the perfect suburban existence they portrayed on screen. They were trapped in a fantasy that damaged their real lives while America watched and believed the lie. What you're about to discover goes beyond nostalgic TV history. A child star whose fame sparked false death rumors during Vietnam, a TV brother battling clinical depression while playing the perfect son, and a mother hiding physical insecurity behind pearls and aprons. The picket fence was a set piece, but the pain behind those smiles was heartbreakingly real. Jerry Mathers, Theodore Beaver Cleaver. Jerry Mathers' transformation into America's favorite little boy came at a devastating cost that destroyed any chance of a normal childhood. At age 9, Mathers became the center of a cultural phenomenon. But what audiences never saw was how the demands of weekly television production violated child labor protections and robbed him of the innocent childhood his character supposedly represented. The studio exploitation was systematic and severe. Mathers worked adult hours on production schedules that technically violated California's child labor laws, but loopholes in industry connections allowed the show to continue. He would arrive at the studio early in the morning for wardrobe and makeup, film all day with minimal breaks, then receive tutoring from an on-set teacher who struggled to provide adequate education while accommodating production demands. His childhood consisted of memorizing scripts, hitting marks, and performing innocence for cameras rather than actually experiencing it. The educational sacrifice haunted Mathers for years. While other children attended regular schools, developed friendships, and participated in normal activities, Mathers existed in the artificial world of soundstages and adult professionals. His on-set teacher provided minimum required instruction, but the constant filming interruptions meant his education was fragmented and inadequate. He later described feeling intellectually unprepared for college and adult life, having spent his formative years pretending to be a child rather than actually being one. The most bizarre consequence of Mathers' fame was the Vietnam War death hoax that spread in the late 1960s. Rumors circulated wildly that Jerry Mathers had been killed in action in Vietnam, supposedly dying heroically while serving as a soldier. The story became so widespread and persistent that Mathers had to make public appearances and official statements to prove he was still alive. The hoax revealed how completely audiences had conflated the actor with his character, assuming that wholesome Beaver Cleaver would naturally have grown up to serve his country in the controversial war. Tony Dow, Wally Cleaver. Tony Dow's portrayal of the perfect older brother Wally Cleaver masked a lifelong battle with clinical depression that nearly destroyed him multiple times, creating a cruel irony where the actor playing television's most well-adjusted teenager was suffering from severe mental illness that nobody recognized or addressed properly. Dow's depression began during the show's run, though he didn't understand what he was experiencing at the time. The pressure to embody Wally's impossible standard of kindness, rationality, and emotional stability, while dealing with normal adolescence and overwhelming fame, created psychological strain that manifested in ways 1950s society had no framework to understand or treat. Depression wasn't discussed openly in that era, especially not among teenage boys who were expected to be strong, stoic, and emotionally composed at all times. The most devastating aspect of Dow's struggle was how playing Wally Cleaver became a form of ongoing psychological torture. Every episode required him to demonstrate the exact emotional regulation and optimistic outlook that his depression made impossible in real life. He had to pretend to be happy, well-adjusted, and problem-free, while internally battling darkness that made basic functioning extraordinarily difficult. The contrast between his character and his reality created a dissociative experience where he felt like a fraud performing a version of mental health he couldn't achieve for himself. Dow's discovery of sculpture and visual art in adulthood became literally life-saving, providing a therapeutic outlet that traditional psychiatric treatment couldn't offer. Working with his hands, creating physical objects from abstract emotions, allowed him to process feelings that words couldn't capture. Barbara Billingsley, June Cleaver. Barbara Billingsley's transformation into June Cleaver, the ultimate 1950s television mother, required her to hide painful personal realities behind a costume of pearls and perfectly pressed dresses. The secret behind those iconic pearl necklaces reveals how Hollywood's relentless demand for perfection forced actresses to disguise natural physical characteristics that would have made them seem less than the idealized image audiences expected. The pearl necklace wasn't a fashion choice, but a carefully constructed disguise for what Billingsley perceived as a physical flaw. She had a natural hollow at the base of her neck, a minor anatomical feature that she felt made her appear older and less attractive on camera. Rather than accepting this completely normal characteristic, she began wearing pearl necklaces in every single scene to hide what she viewed as an imperfection. The devastating irony was that Billingsley was playing the ideal wife and mother, while her own marriage had collapsed years earlier. She had divorced her second husband in 1947, well before Leave It to Beaver began, and married her third husband in 1959 during the show's run. This meant that for much of the series, she was portraying marital perfection and domestic harmony while navigating the complicated reality of divorce and remarriage in an era when such things were considered deeply shameful and rarely discussed publicly. Billingsley's approach to playing June Cleaver affected her real parenting in unexpected and sometimes troubling ways. She had 2 sons from her first marriage, and the experience of playing the perfect television mother created enormous pressure to live up to June's impossible standard in her actual home. Hugh Beaumont, Ward Cleaver. Hugh Beaumont's portrayal of Ward Cleaver, the endlessly wise and patient father figure, concealed his genuine contempt for the show and his deep frustration with how television trivialized serious moral and ethical issues. What audiences never knew was that Beaumont was a trained Methodist minister with formal theological education who viewed Leave It to Beaver as intellectually beneath him and morally simplistic in ways that offended his religious sensibilities. Beaumont's religious background created constant internal tension with the show's superficial approach to moral education and character development. As an ordained minister, he had studied ethics, theology, and human psychology in considerable depth, making Ward's simplistic fatherly advice feel personally insulting to his intelligence and training. The show's resolution of genuinely complex moral issues through brief living room conversations and easy lessons contradicted everything Beaumont understood about authentic spiritual and ethical development in young people. The most revealing aspect of Beaumont's relationship with Leave It to Beaver was his consistent refusal to become more involved in production, despite numerous opportunities to direct episodes or influence creative direction. Unlike other cast members who enthusiastically embraced the show's cultural success and expanding influence, Beaumont maintained deliberate emotional distance, treating the work as merely a job rather than any kind of artistic calling or meaningful contribution to society. Beaumont's limited participation in the show's growing mythology became increasingly pronounced as the series continued its successful run. While Jerry Mathers and Tony Dow made countless personal appearances, attended fan conventions, and fully embraced their characters' cultural significance, Beaumont avoided such activities whenever contractually possible. Ken Osmond, Eddie Haskell. Ken Osmond's portrayal of Eddie Haskell, television's most famous two-faced troublemaker, created such powerful typecasting that it completely destroyed his acting career and forced him into an entirely different profession just to survive financially. The character that made him famous became a prison he could never escape, demonstrating how a successful child performance could ruin rather than launch an entertainment career. Osmond's Eddie Haskell was television's perfect antagonist, the insincere teenager who spoke respectfully to adults while tormenting his peers behind their backs. The performance was so memorable and distinctive that audiences couldn't see Osmond as anyone else. After Leave It to Beaver ended, he discovered that casting directors either wanted him to play Eddie Haskell variations or wouldn't hire him at all because his face was too recognizable as the iconic troublemaker. The devastating reality of unemployment forced Osmond to completely abandon acting and join the Los Angeles Police Department in the 1970s. This career change shocked fans who couldn't imagine Eddie Haskell becoming a law enforcement officer, but Osmond needed stable income and health insurance that Hollywood wouldn't provide. His LAPD service proved genuinely dangerous. He was shot multiple times in the line of duty, surviving incidents that easily could have killed him. The most tragic aspect of Osmond's story was his growing resentment toward the role. It had defined and limited his entire life. In interviews, he expressed genuine bitterness about how Eddie Haskell had prevented him from being taken seriously as an actor or human being. People on the street would quote Eddie's lines at him, expecting him to perform the character on demand, treating him as a novelty rather than a person. Behind-the-scenes chaos. The production of Leave It to Beaver appeared as wholesome behind the cameras as it did on screen, but the reality involved constant battles with network censors, questionable labor practices with child actors, and creative tensions that revealed how much work went into manufacturing idealized American family life for television audiences. Studio politics dominated every aspect of production, with CBS and later ABC executives maintaining rigid control over content and enforcing strict morality standards that reflected conservative 1950s values. Scripts underwent extensive review processes where network censors examined every line of dialogue and story element for potential controversy. Topics considered too mature, realistic, or challenging for family audiences were systematically eliminated, creating a sanitized version of childhood and family life that bore little resemblance to actual American experiences. The censorship nightmares were absurd by modern standards, but deadly serious to 1950s network executives. The show famously couldn't show a toilet in the bathroom set because bathroom fixtures were considered too crude for television. When a storyline required Beaver to keep a pet alligator in the toilet tank, producers had to negotiate extensively just to show the tank without the bowl. Married couples couldn't be shown in the same bed together, children couldn't use mild profanity or disrespect, parents beyond carefully calibrated limits, and any suggestion of sexuality was absolutely forbidden. Labor violations involving the child actors were systematic but largely ignored by authorities who gave entertainment industry special consideration. Jerry Mathers and other young performers worked hours that exceeded legal limits for minors, with production schedules designed around adult convenience rather than children's needs. The on-set teachers provided minimal education while accommodating filming demands, and child actors had little protected time for rest, play, or normal development. Cultural impact and controversy. Leave It to Beaver's cultural impact extended far beyond entertainment, creating an idealized vision of American family life that influenced generations while simultaneously obscuring the complex realities of 1950s society. The show became a powerful symbol that conservatives would weaponize politically, while critics argued it promoted harmful nostalgia for a past that never actually existed. The show's portrayal of idealized suburban America established impossible standards that real families struggled to meet. The Cleavers lived in material comfort without financial stress, experienced only minor, easily resolved conflicts, and existed in a world where parental wisdom always prevailed and children learned clear moral lessons. This fantasy became the benchmark against which actual families measured themselves, creating feelings of inadequacy and failure when real life proved messier, more complicated, and less wholesome. The racial exclusion was absolute and deliberate. The Cleavers' world was entirely white, with people of color completely absent from their suburban universe. This erasure reflected and reinforced housing segregation, employment discrimination, and the racial hierarchies that defined 1950s America. The show presented whiteness as default American identity, while rendering the actual diversity of American life invisible to television audiences. Conservative political movements later weaponized Leave It to Beaver nostalgia, using the show as evidence that America had declined from some golden age of traditional values. Politicians referenced the Cleavers when arguing against social change, suggesting that returning to 1950s family structures would solve contemporary problems. Revivals and legacy. The 1980s revival series, the new Leave It to Beaver, attempted to recapture the original's magic by bringing back the cast as adults. But the experiment revealed how completely cultural values had shifted and how impossible it was to recreate the original's innocence in a more cynical era. The revival showed Beaver and Wally as grown men with families of their own, attempting to pass on their father's wisdom to a new generation. Jerry Mathers and Tony Dow returned to their iconic roles, now playing parents themselves in stories that paralleled the original series. The concept seemed perfect, allowing audiences to see how the Cleaver Boys turned out while introducing new child characters who could experience similar adventures. The failure was almost immediate and comprehensive. 1980s audiences had moved beyond the original's simple morality tales, expecting more complexity and realism than the revival could provide while maintaining the Cleaver spirit. The show felt like a museum piece, a nostalgic artifact that couldn't compete with sitcoms that addressed divorce, economic stress, and social change. The aging child stars faced the cruel reality of time's passage. Audiences remembered them as eternally young, and seeing them as middle-aged adults with receding hairlines and expanding waistlines disrupted the fantasy. The new child actors couldn't capture the original's chemistry, and the scripts felt tired and repetitive, recycling old storylines without the cultural context that had made them resonate originally. Leave It to Beaver proved that sometimes the most wholesome entertainment hides the darkest realities. The Cleaver family wasn't just a TV show. It was an impossible standard that damaged real families, while child actors sacrificed their youth to perform an innocence they never actually experienced. Subscribe to discover more shocking truths behind television's most beloved classics.